Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Father Dr. Piotr Zelazko. He is a Polish Catholic priest and biblical scholar who serves as the patriarchal vicar for Hebrew-speaking Catholics in Israel within the Latin Patriarchate of Jerusalem. For his work in promoting Christian-Jewish dialogue, he was awarded the prestigious title of Man of Reconciliation in 2026. Father Zelazko.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. You must be tired, but I promise you the text that I'm dealing with is a rocket. It will take you really, it will give you the energy and maybe a new inspiration. Today I would like to explore Pope Francis's 2015 encyclical Laudato Si, which represents one of the most significant...
Trying to say something to you.
I just wanted to add that we brought the text for everybody.
Yeah, well, that's the introduction to the encyclical. It might be helpful to understand what is this document. I will come to it in a minute. This document represents very significant contribution of contemporary Catholic social teaching to global ethical reflection on the ecological crisis. But it is remarkable not only within the Church. Of course, encyclical is a document of a very high doctrinal value for all the Catholics. It's not like the Pope says something, yeah, listen. No, listen carefully. And, but also, I think, in my opinion, in the broader intellectual and political landscape, because it engages in a sustained dialogue with science, philosophy, economics, and environmental studies, while remaining firmly rooted in theological anthropology. Let me begin with a guiding question that frames the entire encyclical. What kind of world do we want to leave to those who come after us? At first glance, this may appear to be an environmental question, but in fact it's much deeper. It is an anthropological question because it concerns who we are as human beings. It is a moral question because it concerns responsibility and justice. And it is a theological question because it teaches on creation as a gift entrusted to us by God. In this sense, Laudato Si challenges us to reconsider not only what we do to the environment, but how we understand our place within it. The encyclical introduces the powerful image of the earth as our common home. This expression is not merely poetic. It carries profound ethical implications. A home is not an object to be used and discarded, but a space of belonging, relationship, and care. Pope Francis argues that the current ecological crisis cannot be reduced to a single issue such as climate change, pollution. Rather, it must be seen and understood as a multidimensional crisis, encompassing the degradation of the natural environment, the breakdown of social relationships, the inequalities embedded in economic systems, and a broader spiritual disorientation in modern life. In other words, what we are facing is not only the environmental problem, but a crisis of meaning and of human responsibility. For this reason, purely technical or political solutions, while necessary, are not sufficient. What is required is a deeper transformation, a rethinking of how we perceive the world and our role within it. This leads me to the central thesis I would like to propose today. Laudato Si calls for a profound transformation of our worldview, from fragmentation to relationality, from domination to stewardship, and from consumption to responsibility. During this short lecture, I will examine how Pope Francis develops this vision, drawing on both theological tradition and contemporary analysis, and how it challenges us to rethink the ethical foundations of our engagement with the world. Let us turn now for a minute to the structure and method of Laudato Si. It's a long document. You can find it in 20-something languages somewhere in the internet, so Google it. It's absolutely fantastic. The encyclical is carefully organized into 6 chapters, and its movement can be described broadly as a progression from diagnosis to response, from analysis to transformation. First, Pope Francis begins with a diagnosis of ecological crisis. In this opening chapter, he draws on scientific data and global observations, addressing issues such as climate change, environmental pollution, water scarcity, and the loss of biodiversity. What is significant here is that the Pope does not attempt to replace scientific discourse. Rather, he acknowledges its authority and integrates its findings into a moral framework. The ecological crisis is thus presented not as an abstract concern, but as an empirically verifiable reality with concrete consequences, especially for vulnerable populations. Second, the encyclical offers a biblical and theological vision of creation. Here, Pope Francis returns to foundational scriptural texts and theological traditions to articulate a vision of the world as created, sustained, and loved by God. This step is crucial because it moves the discussion beyond mere environmental management and situates it within a theology of creation. Ecology is no longer simply about preserving resources, it becomes a question of faithfulness to a divine gift. Third, the document proceeds to analyze what it calls the human roots of the crisis. At this point, the encyclical shifts from symptoms to causes, identifying underlying cultural and philosophical dynamics. Central to this analysis is the concept of the technocratic paradigm. I will talk about it later. A mindset that prioritizes efficiency, control, and utility, often at the expense of ethical reflection and relational responsibility. This critique is not directed against technology itself, but against a reductionist worldview in which technological power is no longer guided by moral vision. Fourth, Pope Francis introduces the concept of integral ecology, which serves as the central theoretical framework for the entire document. Integral ecology proposes that environmental, social, economic, cultural, and spiritual dimensions of life must be understood as interconnected. This marks a shift away from fragmented approaches to problem solving and toward holistic vision. Fifth, the encyclical turns to practical lines in action. Here, Pope Francis outlines positive responses at multiple levels. Political level, including international cooperation and public policy. Social level, including institutional responsibility and education. And individual level, including lifestyle changes and ethical consumptions. Importantly, these proposals are not presented as purely technical solutions, but as expressions of a broader ethical transformation. Finally, the document concludes with a reflection on ecological spirituality. This final chapter emphasizes that lasting change requires not only structural reforms, but also a conversion of the human heart. Pope Francis here speaks of ecological conversion, a transformation in which individuals begin to see the world not as an object, but as a sacrament of communion, reflecting the presence of God. Maybe one important word about methodological perspective of this document, because especially we in the interfaith dialogue, whenever there is a topic, for example, ecology, we are used to hear, okay, so the Quran says like this, so do like this. The Jewish sources speak like this, so here's the list of do's and don'ts. The Christian New Testament or Jesus says like this, so do this or don't do this. I mean, here from a methodological perspective, Laudato Si is profoundly interdisciplinary. It brings into dialogue the three major forms of discourse: scientific analysis, which provides empirical ground; philosophical critique, which examines assumptions and worldviews; and theological reflection, which offers ultimate meaning and ethical orientation. What is particularly interesting for me here is that the document does not treat these domains as separate or competing. Instead, it insists on a constructive dialogue between faith and reason. Theology is not opposed to empirical observation. Rather, it interprets and deepens it, situating scientific knowledge within a broader horizon of meaning. In this way, Laudato Si exemplifies an integrated intellectual approach, one that resists both scientific reductionism and theological isolation, and instead seeks of unified understanding of reality. Let us now turn to the core conceptual framework of Laudato Si. First, the most important concept introduced by Pope Francis is that of integral ecology. Integral ecology refers to the idea of environmental, social, economic, and cultural issues. They are not separate problems. Pope Francis states everything is interconnected. This is not simply an observation. It reflects a deeper philosophical and theological claim about the nature and reality itself. From a biblical and classical perspective, reality is fundamentally relational. Creation is not a collection of isolated entities, but it is an ordered whole, a cosmos marked by interdependence and coherence. This understanding can be traced back, as I said, from biblical creation theology, but also from the classical notion of ordo or harmonious order, so much present in the Judeo-Christian civilization. Therefore, to damage one dimension of reality, it means inevitably to affect the whole. This leads to an important ethical conclusion: ecological harm is never purely environmental. It always includes social consequences, particularly for the poor, moral consequences in terms of injustice, and even spiritual consequences reflecting a disordered relationship with creation and with God. Integral ecology requires a holistic response, one that refuses fragmented solutions. A second central concept in the encyclical is the critique of what Pope Francis calls the technocratic paradigm. By this term, he refers not simply to technology itself, but to a dominant cultural mindset that interprets reality primarily through the categories of control, efficiency, and utility. Within this framework, nature is reduced to a raw material, something to be manipulated and exploited for human purposes. At the same time, human beings themselves risk becoming functional elements within systems of production and consumption. In other words, both nature and humanity are absorbed into a logic of instrumentality. At the deepest level, Laudato Si is addressing also the fundamental question: what does it mean to be human? The ecological crisis in this sense is not only a failure of policy or technology, but a crisis of anthropology. The encyclical presents a contrast between two competing visions. The first is the model of human being as a dominating subject, which stands over and against nature and claims the right to exploit it without limit. This view is often appeals to the misinterpretation of the biblical command from Genesis 1:28, have dominion. And it is sometimes understood as domination in the sense of unchecked control. And the second vision proposed by the Pope, in this perspective, the human person is created in the image of God, and thus the image implies non-arbitrary power, but reflective responsibility. To be in relationship with God, with others, and with creation, and to exercise care rather than domination. Now we come to one of the most powerful ethical syntheses in Laudato Si, the link between the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. Pope Francis insists that these are not two separate crises, but one and the same reality viewed from different perspectives. Environmental degradation affects the most vulnerable populations, those who depend directly on the land, those who lack economic and political power, and those already living in the margins. I will say only this ethical implication: care for creation and care for the poor cannot be separated. I see that I don't have much time, so I will jump maybe now into the...
Not such a rocket.
into the biblical texts, because this is something that maybe interests you a little bit more. Let's talk about creation as good. You know, as Genesis 1:31, God saw everything that he made, and indeed it was very good. Creation is not neutral, is not arbitrary, and is not merely functional. It's good. It has moral repercussions on how we deal with creation. Another text, very, very famous, quoted here from Psalm 24, L'Adonai haaretz umlo hu melech hakavod. The earth is the Lord's and all that is in it. This establishes a crucial theological principle. Unlimited ownership belongs to God, not to humanity. Therefore, human authority over creation is always delegated and accountable. I had also two very Christian texts, but I was told that in the small groups you dealt with the text from the letter to the Colossians.
Glad to hear your thoughts.
All things have been created through him and for him. In him all things hold together. Here God is not only, like in Christian perspective, the Messiah, Christ, is not only the Redeemer, but the principle of unity within creation. The Logos, through him God created the world. Vayomer Elohim, and God said, and it happened. Okay, this reinforces the idea of interconnectedness, providing the theological foundation for integral ecology. Let me just conclude by returning to the central insight of Laudato Si. This document is not simply a document about environmental protection. At a deeper level, it is a call to conversion of vision. What Pope Francis proposes is not merely a set of policies. He calls us to move from domination to care, from isolation to relationship, from consumption to gratitude. As the Pope writes, living our vocation to be protectors of God's handwork is essential to a life of virtue. This statement is so crucial for me because it means that care for creation is not optional or secondary. It is a part of what it means to live a good and faithful life. It's a path of holiness. Let me just finish with this short prayer. May we learn to recognize creation not as an object to be used, but as a gift to be received, protected, and shared. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Father Zelazko, for that wonderful presentation, concluding with your prayer. I was told by our organizers that we have less time than we thought. There's a cab coming apparently to take people to their hotels in Tel Aviv. So I'm going to move us right now. I'm sorry. Perhaps you can get your questions in about the particular tradition. But I do want to make sure that we get to the question of, we've seen brilliant and penetrating analyses of each faith's contribution, but how can interfaith work contribute to the problem of state sustainability? Maybe we'll start with you, Rabbi.
I suppose there's a question that precedes that one, which is what can religion and what can religions do about it? And very often the answer is very little. Because the decisions, the critical decisions, are in the hands of the politicians. But nevertheless, issues can be raised. And the great thing about Pope Francis's encyclical was precisely that it was a pope raising things. The truth of the matter, most of what he wrote had already been written by two of his predecessors. The idea of integral sustainability was already, Pope John Paul II already used that term, integral ecology, excuse me. But it acquired a visibility with Pope Francis because people in certain positions have got, therefore, the attention of the global media. And probably no one as much as the Pope has in religion. So the first challenge is accessibility, and how do you get these issues raised? But then there's a really important thing to bear in mind with regards to religions, and it's relevant to interfaith. I'm a president of the largest, it's actually the largest world interfaith body called Religions for Peace. And we were the recipient of a very large amount of money from the Gates Foundation to deal with AIDS orphans in Africa. Why us? Because religion is the delivery system. If you want to get down to the grassroots, it's through the churches and through the mosques that you can get to the masses. And therefore, from an educational point of view, environmental activity needs to work much more with those communities. So the simple example is just sitting 2 chairs away from you. So Rabbi Natan Levy has his Interfaith Center for the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development, works together with other religious communities to be able to bring knowledge of the issues and the ways in which they may be addressed to a broad cross-section. So the simple answer to your question is education. But in a world where, by definition, the media are going to focus upon the negative and not on the positive, and the areas of interreligious cooperation tend to be sidelined, and most people tend to be oblivious to them, despite the fact that never before in human history has there been as much interfaith collaboration, cooperation, and communication as there is today in the world. Never, ever before. Not even between those who are presented as being in a perpetual tension with each other, like Islam and Judaism. More organizations, more initiatives, more collaboration than ever before. But it doesn't hit the headlines because it's good news. And this, of course, is an enormous challenge. Very often I say that we go to interfaith conferences, we need to organize it. Somebody gets a bloody nose from a member of another religion, then it will get coverage, and then people will know about the conference. So this is the gathering of people from different faiths around a particular topic is a way of raising greater consciousness and awareness. But it's not good enough. It's not good enough, and we need to find better avenues to be able to influence policymakers. But let me emphasize that I'm involved in interfaith relations not only because I want to do good in the world and because I believe it's critical in order to promote peace and to be able to work together for values that we share to be greater than the sum of our different parts. It's also for me an opportunity to be able to discover the divine beyond the confines of my own particular heritage. And it's a way, in fact, which I hope can broaden my own spirituality. And therefore, even if you could prove to me that I'm wasting my time in terms of having an impact on the environment, I would still want to be deeply involved in interfaith relations.
Well, I think as religious leaders, we work very often at the very lowest level in the communities. And in this case, each of us, all of us, have some influence on the people in the field. Like this is the basic work that we do. And seeing that other religious leaders have the same point of view, have the same idea of keeping integral ecology, keeping the world for the next generations, it helps. Show it to your people that it's not a purely Christian, Jewish, or Muslim thing. It's something that unites us above all conflicts. I think more people are interested on the very low level of communities in interfaith meetings where families, Jewish, Christian, Muslim families gather together for a picnic to clean the shores of Kinneret, the Galilean Sea together, sit together and talk about how can we avoid the use of disposable plastic, which in Israel is probably the highest amount per capita in the world. Okay? And my priests, sometimes we preach about it. It's usually men's fault because it's the women who traditionally have to clean after, and we don't help. So it's more comfortable just to use the plastic and throw it away. Okay? Start helping, start cleaning, or what to do, I don't know, this is a Jewish question, what to do if this is so comfortable for kashrut, no? Disposable plastic is so easy to use because you don't need to care about 2 kinds of dishes. I mean, we should talk about it and show it to our communities as the lowest level of taking care of the earth. And I think here, interreligious contact, being together, saying, okay, it's not something purely in my... I don't do this because I believe in this. Yes, also. But I see that the others believe like me. But I see that I'm a part of... We are billions. Our people vote. Our people choose the politicians, okay? We really might have impact. As long as we stay together and show to the people this is something that unites us, we have no choice. Or we unite, or people will say, yeah, but they say because Islam says this, I don't believe in Quran, why should I do this? Oh, this New Testament, it's all about Jesus, I don't want to listen about it. Or why should I care about the Jewish sources? Let's show it, it's something deeper. There is a difference between faith and religion. Our religions might be different, but deep down we believe all together that God gave us this world, that human beings are part of nature, that domination doesn't mean uncontrolled power. Okay, we should show it to our people on the community levels, and this is interreligious dialogue and interreligious meeting.
I think
both my colleagues have covered a lot of it. I think education is the important one.
Which is year after year, Pew Research comes out, which says the more religious communities, the more religious people are, the less likely they are to want environmental laws, the less likely they are to think that climate change is an issue that humans have created. What do we do about the fact that our most confessing parts of our community, the most religious elements of our community, are the least likely to care about these issues and to be doing something about these issues in practice, despite the fact they have all these great texts and traditions?
I actually thought what Rabbi Rosen started with, the story about telling the person that there is a connection between this and religion. I think that was a very telling story, because most practitioners do not make.
I think there are two issues as to why, behind this phenomenon that you're referring to. One is a reactionary response to modernity that tends to come from I could say, the deeply rooted elements within the respective communities, but very often communities that are, as the word itself reactionary indicates, reacting against certain trends and certain understandings. I remember when I started studying Yeshiva, I started studying in Yeshiva and Yeshivat Mir, the old Yeshivat Mir, when there were only 300, not the factory that exists today. And when there were some people, actually, the first American students there, I was one of the first British students there, I think my brother was the first, and started putting up notices about the dangers of smoking. And they were almost immediately ripped down because the Rebbeim, the teachers, were smoking. And therefore the idea that smoking was bad and was somehow actually in conflict with Jewish teaching, with Jewish law, was something that they couldn't digest, if I can mix my metaphors there a bit. But eventually, I would say, even though it still hasn't succeeded enough in ultra-Orthodox circles, you still do you had Piskei Halacha, religious rulings, by both Rav Ovadia Yosef and Reb Chaim David HaLevi against it, and slowly an understanding that smoking maybe is wrong has begun to permeate there, but it's still a real problem there. But I think, especially in America, if you talk about certain evangelical fundamentalist circles, where there tends to be the most resistance, it's got a lot to do with the same kind of mentality that was in Yeshivat Mir, which is not just because the Rebbeim, the teachers, are smoking, but also anything that modern science has to say that is an ethical injunction and a direction is seen as undermining their own particular worldview and their own particular value system. And therefore, if it's coming from a modern secular world, it must be wrong. Or it can't be, therefore, something that I want to listen and pay attention to. So we have to then find the strategies as how to be able to address that. So if you ask me with regards to evangelicals in America, or those segments in America that are using their own particular Christian identity to deny these particular areas, I would say there are wonderful scholars whose work needs to be better known, and perhaps one of the most significant of them, what's her first name, Hayhoe? Catherine Hayhoe. She's an evangelical scholar, who's written extensively, and she'll go anywhere to be able to talk and to preach the real gospel to those who often will deny it. That's one particular area. The other, if you talk, let's say, talk within our own particular community, and I think that's true in certain Muslim communities that I know, where there might also be a certain insensitivity, is to use language and leverage that relates to them. If you come along and talk about a grand ecological problem and challenges, it's not going to resonate. But if you talk to them specifically about the health and well-being of their children, or dangers that the children face in terms of, let's say, traffic on the streets or other areas, and things that you can specifically address, then you can actually start having an impact. And there have been certain initiatives within the ultra-Orthodox community in Israel to do so that have been relatively successful, and more of that needs to be done. The problem is today that the champions of the cause are relatively few and far between and stretched. But I think it is possible to have an impact.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.